How many fasts have you supervised? Has anyone died during a water fast you've ever overseen?
Well, fortunately, we've had somewhere around 20,000 patients undergo water-only fasting, and to date, we've had no deaths associated with water-only fasting. We have a lot of very seriously ill patients, so I think it speaks to the inherent safety and efficacy of fasting as it's done according to the True North Health Protocol. And the fasting safety study that we did, there was no deaths associated with fasting. And the one, what could be considered serious complication, was a case of hyponatremia, where sodium levels became too low and we had to use intravenous fluids, but the person did fine. Outcome was positive. Nonetheless, it is a serious business. We take it seriously, and we do careful medical evaluation and monitoring to try to ensure that fasting continues to be demonstrated as a safe and effective process.
What have been the results of the fast you've overseen? Have people resolved major health issues?
Well, we see a lot of seriously ill patients at the True North Health Center. Some people joke with us that the name should be True North Health, the last resort. Fortunately, now we're starting to see some patients earlier in their pathological processes, but what we treat very commonly are high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and ulcerative colitis and ankylosing spondylitis and psoriasis and eczema and asthma. We also treat patients that are struggling with obesity, as well as conditions like lymphoma. So, there's a wide variety of conditions. Most of them seem to be tied to dietary excess. A lot of the patients we see have dysbiosis or problems with their digestive system or their immunological systems. These conditions, typically respond well if their patients are appropriately selected, fasting is done appropriately. But to sustain the results requires getting people educated to sustain diet and lifestyle changes over the long term. If you go back to doing the things that cause the problems tend to recur.
The media often reports that alcohol in moderation is part of a healthy diet. What do you think about alcohol's impact on our health?
Well, my colleague John McDougall likes to say that people love good news about their bad habits. And when it comes to alcohol, there's probably nothing more apparent than that. Alcohol is not health food. Alcohol is a major contributing factor to high blood pressure. It's got 7 calories per gram, and as a consequence contributes to obesity. That's why men get the big beer bellies, the plumber's crack. We know that alcohol has detrimental effects on the gut microbiome, and the fact that there's a small amount of plant-based benefit, resveratrol or some antioxidant that might be left from the skin of grapes, we tell our patients just eat the grapes. They don't need to be taking toxic products in order to get some trace amounts of benefit that's still residual from the fact that they're plant-derived substances. Alcohol is a major contributing cause of death and disability in our country, and in our program, it's excluded.
Some people say beans and grains didn't exist until 10,000 years ago, and therefore are not our natural foods, and our bodies aren't programmed to eat them, and therefore we're meant to actually eat animal products. What does the best science have to say?
Well, the fact is that you have a couple billion people on the planet that are living essentially on rice and beans, which are some of the lowest cost calorie products that on the planet, and in many cases doing very well on those substances. So there may be individuals that are sensitive to virtually any food, and the lectins in rice or beans may be no exception. There may be people that have, particularly when their gut's been debilitated, they have a lot of gut leakage, they may have some sensitivities to these more concentrated foods. In those cases, we encourage people to use starchy vegetable materials as a source of their complex carbohydrates, and they do fine. The fact that animal food may have been a part of the diet in the past doesn't necessarily mean today in the environment today that it's a good process. It may not be good for the environment, it may not be good from a moral, ethical, or spiritual viewpoint, and it's certainly not necessary or good from a health viewpoint. So we advocate an exclusively plant food diet that's free of the chemicals added to food, which includes salt, oil, and sugar.
Are hemp, flax, and olive oil good for us to eat? Should we try to include these oils in our diet, or should we try to avoid them?
We recommend the exclusion of all highly processed food products, including oil, salt, and sugar. Oils of all kinds. Now, the fact that some are less bad doesn't make them good. It just makes them less bad. So we recommend that the fats in the diet come from whole foods. So, if you want to take ground flax seeds, if you want to use walnuts if you want to use avocado. That would certainly be acceptable in moderation, just because these very rich foods, it's easy to overdo them. So we advocate that most people are limiting their consumption of nuts or seeds to about an ounce a day. Our target is to get about 10 to 12% of calories from protein, about 15 to 18% of calories of fat for most people, and the balance coming from plant-based complex carbohydrates. Completely avoiding meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar.
Author Chris Kresser, who believes in paleo diets, says that according to studies, eating dietary cholesterol does not lead to higher rates of blood cholesterol in most cases. And even if eating saturated fat and dietary cholesterol does lead to higher saturated fat rates or blood cholesterol, it still doesn't correlate to higher death rates. Do you agree with this? Why or why not?
We know that the consumption of animal food does in fact associate with increased cholesterol levels. You've got a whole society testing that theory, and it's becoming very apparent what's going on there. Now, the fact that cholesterol isn't a perfect predictor of cardiovascular disease, I would agree with. It's not the most sensitive indicator that's out there. However, what does predict problems is consumption of excess animal foods. So the consumption of animal foods I don't think is health promoting. I think there's a whole body of evidence that supports that. And the fact that we're getting into the weeds over certain metabolic markers and what their significance is, and certainly there are some serious problems in how these data have been interpreted. But overall, my conclusion is that the less animal food that we consume in the diet, in general, the better off we're going to be. And we exclude all meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products from the diet of our patients, and I'll let the results of our patients speak for themselves.
How does someone protect their thyroid?
Well, one of the theories nowadays with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, the most common cause of hypothyroidism, is that the immune system is actually the problem. In other words, when you get Hashimoto's thyroiditis, it's your immune system attacking your thyroid. There's different theories about why the immune system might attack the thyroid. We know in the case of celiac disease, where the immune system attacks the intestinal tract, that it's caused by a gluten trigger, and that there's an HLA-DQ gene associated with higher incidence of those issues in patients with celiac disease. It turns out the HLA-DQ gene is also associated with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And so one of the theories is that in some people, the immune system attacks the colon when they're sensitive to gluten and get exposed. Other people, it attacks the thyroid gland. And so it may be that that might be one of the triggers, particularly with the modern wheats where they've made major genetic changes and in the plant, which has had some benefits, like you get about 10 times as much yield per acre and all that kind of stuff. But the consequences to the modification of the gluten itself may have set up a situation where some people are genetically vulnerable and develop autoimmune responses. We know in our experience with wheat in general that it's a very common trigger for many of our patients, and by the exclusion of wheat products, we oftentimes get improvements in joint pain, digestive function, and other things. So it's one of the things we do is we just routinely avoid the gluten-rich grains from the diet that we feed patients, and we've been very satisfied with doing that. It also gets rid of a lot of the products that are typically used with wheat, which are the crackers and the breads, the highly processed, high caloric density foods often used with sugar, oil, and salt, that may not be that health promoting in any case.
Do you eat a 100% plant-based diet? And if so, for how long have you been doing it?
Well, I'm turning 60 years old tomorrow, and I have been on an exclusively vegan diet for 44 years. So I had set out originally to do a 50-year experiment. So I've got about 6 years more, and then I'll reevaluate. But so far, it seems like it's working pretty well.
What advice do you have from all the research you've done on the best way to deal with memory issues and memory loss?
Yeah, so memory is a complicated issue. We know that there's a number of things that affect memory. One of the most important things is you don't want to have strokes. And we know that high blood pressure is a leading contributing cause of stroke. So avoiding high blood pressure by adopting a whole plant food SOS-free diet is an excellent way of avoiding hypertension and hopefully reducing dramatically the likelihood of stroke. We know that sleep deprivation or poor quality of sleep can affect memory and cognitive function. And so people that are overweight oftentimes have sleep apnea, or people that have inflammatory conditions, or people that eat too late at night, or people that are under too much stress. So all of these variables may alter sleep hygiene, and that may in turn have profound effects on cognitive function. The brain's ability to flush itself clean and purify itself with adequate quantity and quality of sleep. So we encourage people to sleep in a cool, dark, and quiet place, and sleep so long that they can wake spontaneously feeling refreshed. And that may vary from person to person, but it's oftentimes more than what people are getting. And chronic sleep deprivation cumulatively is thought to have a detrimental effect that may be associated with problems with cognition as well as dementia and other problems. Another aspect of improving sleep quality as well as cognitive function may involve exercise. People that engage in regular aerobic exercise are thought to have better function and better capacity. So, we believe that those are the three hallmarks of healthful living: is diet, sleep, and exercise. And so we try to stay focused on all of them.